The first black ship materialized without warning above Luna Station, its obsidian hull drinking in starlight like a void carved from space itself. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez felt his coffee cup slip from nerveless fingers as the massive vessel, easily 3 kilometers long, hung motionless against the star field, defying every known law of physics. No energy signatures, no propulsion trails, no communication attempts. Just silence that pressed against the soul like a physical weight. Within minutes, 17 more identical ships phased into existence across human space, positioning themselves above Earth's major colonies and orbital installations with surgical precision. The Terran Defense Force scrambled every available vessel, but their weapons targeting systems couldn't even achieve a lock. The ships seemed to exist in a state that made conventional sensors slide off them like water from glass. Captain Jennifer Walsh aboard the destroyer Defiance watched her tactical display flicker uselessly as she tried to scan the vessel hovering above New Geneva Colony. "It's like trying to grab smoke," she muttered to her weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander David Park, whose hands danced frantically across his console in futile attempts to penetrate whatever technology rendered the ships nearly invisible to their instruments. The black ships maintained their vigil for exactly 72 hours, during which time every government on Earth and throughout the colonies held emergency sessions. Scientists worked around the clock to understand the phenomenon, and ordinary citizens looked up at their skies with a mixture of wonder and growing dread. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the ships began to move. Not toward any strategic targets or population centers, but in a coordinated pattern that suggested they were hurting something, or someone. Admiral Rodriguez realized with growing horror that the ships were positioning themselves to cut off all major hyperspace routes, effectively trapping humanity within their own solar system and immediate colonies. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Whatever these beings wanted, they intended to ensure humanity couldn't run. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, Earth's leading xenobiologist, stood in the emergency command center beneath Geneva, watching the holographic display show the ship's movements with clinical precision. "They're not attacking," she observed, her voice cutting through the chaos of military chatter and political arguments. "This is containment protocol. They're studying us." Her words sent a chill through the assembled leaders because it implied something far worse than immediate destruction. It suggested humanity had become specimens in some cosmic experiment. The black ship's technology was so far beyond human understanding that Earth's most advanced AI systems couldn't even begin to analyze their construction or capabilities. Yet there was something in their behavior, a methodical patience that reminded Dr. Morgan of researchers observing lab animals. The thought that humanity might be nothing more than an interesting curiosity to these beings was almost more terrifying than the prospect of invasion. As the fourth day dawned, the ships finally acted. A single pulse of energy, barely detectable and completely harmless, swept across every human settlement simultaneously. In its wake, every electronic device on Earth and throughout the colonies displayed the same message in perfect, unaccented English: "Compliance testing will commence in 72 hours. Prepare for evaluation." The message repeated in every human language, suggesting the aliens had been monitoring human communications for far longer than anyone had realized. President Catherine Hayes convened an emergency session of the Global Defense Council, bringing together military leaders, scientists, and diplomats from across human space. The debate raged for hours. Some advocated immediate surrender, others pushed for a preemptive strike despite the obvious technological disadvantage, while a few suggested attempting communication. Admiral Rodriguez found himself studying the tactical displays, noting how the ships had positioned themselves not just to contain humanity, but to observe every major population center simultaneously. "They want to see how we react," he realized aloud, interrupting a heated argument between the Secretary of Defense and the head of Colonial Affairs. "This isn't about conquest, it's about assessment. They're testing us." The revelation shifted the entire discussion because it meant humanity's response would determine their fate. Dr. Morgan pulled up historical data on every first contact scenario humanity had ever imagined, looking for patterns that might guide their decision. What she found was troubling. Every simulation, every theoretical framework assumed the aliens would communicate their intentions clearly. These beings offered no explanation, no demands, no negotiation. Just a countdown to an unknown test with unknown consequences for failure. As the 72-hour deadline approached, something unexpected began happening across human space. Instead of panic or despair, a strange calm settled over the colonies. Families gathered together, communities organized mutual support networks, and military units reported unprecedented levels of cohesion and determination. It was as if the prospect of facing the unknown had awakened something fundamental in human nature, not the fear of death but the refusal to face it on their knees. Captain Walsh found herself thinking about her grandmother's stories of the London Blitz, how ordinary people had faced annihilation with quiet courage and stubborn defiance. Perhaps that was what these aliens didn't understand about humanity, that the species that had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars had never learned how to surrender gracefully. The black ships maintained their silent vigil, waiting with inhuman patience for whatever test they had planned. But across human space, from the orbital cities around Jupiter to the mining colonies in the asteroid belt, humanity was preparing to show these mysterious visitors exactly what it meant to be human. The countdown continued, but for the first time since the ships had arrived, Admiral Rodriguez found himself smiling grimly as he watched his species prepare to face the unknown with the same stubborn determination that had carried them from Earth to the stars. Part 2. The compliance testing began at exactly 0800 Greenwich Mean Time with a phenomenon that defied every law of physics humanity thought they understood. Across 17 worlds simultaneously, gravity simply stopped working in perfectly circular zones exactly 1 kilometer in diameter, centered on each planet's primary population hub. On Earth, the zone encompassed most of downtown Geneva, where the Global Defense Council was meeting in emergency session. President Hayes watched in stunned silence as her coffee cup floated past her face, followed by loose papers, pens, and anything else not bolted down. The effect wasn't chaotic. Objects moved with deliberate, almost gentle precision, as if guided by invisible hands toward the center of each zone. Admiral Rodriguez felt his stomach lurch as his feet left the ground, but his military training kicked in immediately. All personnel remain calm and use handholds, he commanded over the comm system, his voice steady despite the surreal circumstances. Outside the building, citizens of Geneva found themselves floating in a bizarre ballet of suspended animation, cars and pedestrians alike drifting slowly upward in perfect silence. The black ships had somehow created localized gravity wells that pulled everything toward a central point roughly 50 meters above ground level, but the force was so gentle that nothing was damaged. It was as if they were being carefully collected rather than attacked. Dr. Morgan managed to activate her tablet while floating near the conference room ceiling, frantically taking readings of the gravitational anomaly. "The field strength is precisely calibrated," she called out to the others. "They're not trying to hurt us. They're demonstrating absolute control over fundamental forces." Her words carried a chilling implication. Beings capable of manipulating gravity with such precision could have crushed every human settlement instantly if they had chosen to do so. Instead, they were making a point about the vast gulf between human and alien capabilities. Similar scenes played out across all 17 affected worlds, from the agricultural domes of Ceres to the underwater cities of Europa. Millions of humans found themselves gently lifted from their daily routines and suspended in mid-air, completely helpless but unharmed. The psychological impact was devastating. Humanity's sense of control over their environment, their technology, their very existence, evaporated in the space of minutes. Yet something remarkable began to happen in those floating crowds. Instead of panic or despair, people started reaching out to help each other, forming human chains to guide children and elderly citizens to safety, sharing water and supplies with strangers, organizing themselves into coherent groups despite their impossible circumstances. Captain Walsh, floating in the bridge of her destroyer above New Geneva Colony, watched her crew adapt to the situation with professional efficiency that made her proud. "Helm, can you compensate for the gravitational distortion?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Lieutenant Commander Park shook his head grimly. "Our inertial dampeners are completely overwhelmed, Captain. Whatever they're doing, it's operating on a level our technology can't even detect, let alone counter." The realization that humanity's most advanced warships were as helpless as paper boats in a hurricane should have been demoralizing, but Walsh found herself thinking about her ancestors who had faced impossible odds with nothing but determination and ingenuity. The black ships might control gravity itself, but they couldn't control the human spirit. After exactly 6 hours, the gravitational fields reversed, gently lowering everyone back to solid ground with the same careful precision they had been lifted. Not a single person across 17 worlds had been seriously injured, despite millions being suspended in midair for hours. The message was clear. The aliens possessed godlike power but had chosen restraint. As people found their footing and began checking on their neighbors, a new message appeared on every screen across human space. Phase 1 complete. Cooperation Index, 94.7%. Proceeding to Phase 2. The Cooperation Index puzzled Dr. Morgan until she realized what the aliens had been measuring. During those 6 hours of helplessness, They had been observing how humans treated each other when stripped of all technological advantages and physical control. The high score suggested they had been impressed by humanity's instinctive tendency to help rather than exploit each other in crisis situations. But what did that mean for Phase 2? The answer came 12 hours later when every human settlement experienced a complete technological blackout. Not just power failures. Every electronic device, from the most sophisticated AI systems to simple digital watches, simply stopped functioning. The blackout was so complete that even basic circuits failed to conduct electricity, as if the fundamental properties of matter had been temporarily altered. Cities that had relied on technology for everything from air recycling to food distribution suddenly found themselves thrust back into a pre-industrial existence. Yet once again humanity's response surprised even their observers. Instead of chaos and collapse, communities rapidly organized themselves using principles that had sustained human civilization for millennia before the advent of advanced technology. Admiral Rodriguez found himself coordinating relief efforts using nothing but voice commands and written messages, relying on the same leadership principles that had guided military commanders throughout history. "We've faced worse than this," he told his staff as they worked by candlelight in the emergency command center. "Our ancestors built civilizations without computers or artificial gravity. We can survive a few days without them." His confidence wasn't misplaced. Across human space, people were rediscovering skills their grandparents had taken for granted, forming neighborhood councils to distribute resources, organizing work details to maintain essential services, and creating communication networks using everything from signal fires to trained messenger birds. The aliens had stripped away humanity's technological crutches, but they had also revealed the underlying strength that had carried the species from caves to stars. Dr. Morgan, working by lamplight in her laboratory, began to understand the pattern. "They're not testing our technology," she realized, speaking to her assistant who was manually recording observations in a paper notebook. "They're testing us. Our character, our resilience, our ability to maintain civilization under pressure." The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. If the aliens were interested in humanity's essential nature rather than their military capabilities, it suggested they might be looking for something other than conquest. As the technological blackout entered its second day, reports began filtering in through the primitive communication networks that had sprung up across human space. Every settlement was not just surviving but thriving in ways that surprised even the humans themselves. Crime rates had plummeted as communities pulled together, innovation flourished as people rediscovered mechanical solutions to everyday problems, and a sense of shared purpose emerged that had been missing from the comfortable but isolated existence of the technological age. The black ships continued their silent observation, but now their presence felt less like a threat and more like a test that humanity was determined to pass. Whatever Phase 2 would bring, the human species was proving that their strength lay not in their machines but in their unbreakable spirit and their instinctive drive to survive and protect each other against any odds. Part 3 Phase 2 escalated beyond technological deprivation into something far more insidious and psychologically devastating. The blackout ended as abruptly as it had begun, but when the systems came back online, humanity discovered that the aliens had done something impossible. They had edited human history. Every database, every archive, every digital record had been subtly altered to show that Earth had never developed space travel. According to every computer system across 17 worlds, humanity was still confined to their home planet, and the colonies they were currently living on simply didn't exist in any official record. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Colonists on Mars found their birth certificates listed Earth as their birthplace, despite being third-generation Martian natives. The construction records for Luna Station showed it had never been built, even as people walked through its corridors. Dr. Morgan stared at her own research files, which now indicated she had spent her entire career studying theoretical xenobiology rather than preparing for actual first contact. "They're attacking our sense of reality," she whispered to her assistant, Thomas Bradley, whose own personnel file now claimed he had never left Earth's surface. The aliens had created a perfect paradox. Humans living in colonies that, according to every official record, had never been established by a species that had never achieved interstellar travel. Some people began to question their own memories, wondering if they were suffering from some form of mass delusion. Support groups formed spontaneously as colonists struggled to reconcile their lived experiences with the documentary evidence that contradicted everything they knew about their own lives. Captain Walsh found herself in the surreal position of commanding a starship that, according to her ship's own computer, had never been constructed. Her crew manifest listed everyone as Earth-based personnel, and the ship's logs showed a completely fabricated history of terrestrial naval operations. "They want us to doubt ourselves," she told her senior staff during an emergency meeting. "They're trying to break our confidence in our own perceptions and achievements." Lieutenant Commander Park nodded grimly as he reviewed tactical displays that showed their current position as impossible according to the ship's navigation database. The aliens weren't just demonstrating technological superiority, they were conducting psychological warfare designed to undermine humanity's sense of identity and accomplishment. Admiral Rodriguez convened an emergency session of military leaders who found themselves in the bizarre situation of commanding fleets that officially didn't exist while defending colonies that had supposedly never been built. "This is more sophisticated than any propaganda campaign in human history," he observed, studying reports from across human space. "They're not trying to convince us of a lie, they're making us question the nature of truth itself." The strategy was diabolically effective because it attacked the foundation of human civilization, the shared understanding of history and achievement that bound communities together. Some settlements began experiencing social breakdown as people argued over what was real and what was fabricated, but others responded with characteristic human stubbornness. In the mining colonies of the asteroid belt, workers simply ignored the contradictory records and continued their operations based on practical knowledge and direct experience. "I don't care what the computer says," declared Chief Engineer Rebecca Martinez as she supervised the extraction operations on Vesta. "I've been working these asteroids for 15 years, and no alien mind game is going to convince me otherwise." The resistance to the psychological manipulation revealed something the aliens might not have anticipated about human nature. While individuals could be confused and demoralized by contradictory information, human communities possessed a collective memory that was remarkably resilient. Families shared stories that contradicted the official records, veterans compared experiences that the databases claimed had never happened, and gradually a network of oral history emerged that preserved the true timeline of human expansion into space. Dr. Morgan began documenting these personal accounts, creating a parallel archive of human memory that existed independently of any electronic system. "They can change our records," she told President Hayes during a secure communication, "but they can't change what we remember, what we've experienced, what we've built with our own hands." The project became a form of resistance, with people across human space contributing their memories and experiences to create an unalterable record of human achievement that existed in the minds and hearts of the people themselves. As the psychological assault continued into its third day, something unexpected began happening across human settlements. Instead of breaking down under the cognitive dissonance, people started to take pride in their ability to maintain their sense of reality despite the contradictory evidence. The experience of living through impossible circumstances, existing in colonies that officially didn't exist, operating technology that supposedly had never been invented, became a source of strength rather than confusion. Children born on Mars began wearing badges declaring themselves impossible people from an impossible place, turning the aliens' psychological weapon into a symbol of human resilience. The black ships had intended to shatter human confidence, but instead they had created a shared experience that unified the species in ways that decades of peaceful cooperation had never achieved. Every human alive had become part of a secret history that only they could remember, a hidden truth that bound them together against any external force that tried to redefine their reality. The aliens' message system activated again on the fourth day, displaying a new communication across all human settlements. Phase 2 complete. Reality coherence maintained, 89.3%. Psychological resilience index, 97.1%. Initiating Phase 3. Dr. Morgan felt a chill as she read the statistics because they suggested the aliens had been testing humanity's ability to maintain their sense of identity under extreme psychological pressure. The high resilience score indicated that humans had passed this test as well, but it also meant the aliens were learning exactly how much pressure the human psyche could withstand before breaking. Whatever Phase 3 would bring, it would likely push humanity even closer to their breaking point. Yet as she looked around at her colleagues who continued their work despite living in a reality that officially denied their existence, Dr. Morgan felt a surge of pride in her species. The aliens might possess technology that seemed like magic, but they were discovering that the human spirit was far more difficult to break than they had anticipated. The countdown to Phase 3 began immediately, but this time humanity was ready. They had learned that the aliens were testing not their technology or their military might, but their essential character as a species. Each test had been designed to strip away another layer of human civilization. First their physical control, then their technological dependence, and finally their sense of historical identity. Yet each time humanity had not only survived but had revealed new depths of resilience and cooperation. As the black ships prepared their next challenge, 17 worlds full of impossible people living impossible lives prepared to show their mysterious observers that the human spirit was the one force in the universe that could not be edited, manipulated, or broken by any external power, no matter how advanced or incomprehensible it might be. Part 4 ***. Phase 3 began with an assault on the most fundamental aspect of human existence: their ability to communicate with each other. At precisely midnight Greenwich Mean Time, every human being across 17 worlds simultaneously lost the ability to understand any language except their own native tongue. The effect was instantaneous and complete. Admiral Rodriguez, who had been fluent in 6 languages since childhood, found himself staring blankly at his Spanish-speaking aide as the man's words became meaningless sounds. Dr. Morgan, who had conducted research in 12 different languages, discovered she could no longer comprehend even basic scientific terminology in anything but English. The aliens had somehow severed the neural pathways that allowed humans to process languages they hadn't learned as children, effectively fragmenting human civilization along linguistic lines. The immediate impact was catastrophic for a species that had spent centuries building a unified interstellar culture. On Luna Station, where crews from 40 different nations worked together using standard galactic English as their common tongue, operations ground to a halt as engineers, scientists, and technicians found themselves unable to communicate with colleagues they had worked alongside for years. Captain Walsh watched in horror as her bridge crew, carefully selected from the best officers across the Terran Defense Force, suddenly became isolated islands of confusion. Her helmsman, who had emigrated from Brazil as a child, could only speak Portuguese, while her weapons officer reverted to his native Korean, and her communications specialist found herself limited to Mandarin Chinese. "This is impossible," she muttered in English, the only language her brain would now process, while around her the efficient machine of her starship's command structure collapsed into babble. The aliens had identified the cornerstone of human cooperation, their ability to share ideas across cultural boundaries, and had surgically removed it with the same precision they had demonstrated in manipulating gravity and technology. Lieutenant Commander Park tried desperately to coordinate with his weapons team, but the technical manuals that had been translated into dozens of languages were now incomprehensible to anyone who hadn't learned them in their original form. The realization that humanity's greatest strength, their diversity and ability to unite despite differences, had been turned into their greatest weakness was almost more devastating than the physical challenges they had faced. Yet even as communication networks collapsed and international cooperation seemed impossible, something remarkable began happening across human space. People started developing new ways to communicate that transcended spoken language. On Ceres Station, Chief Engineer Martinez found herself working with a team that spoke 7 different languages, but they began using hand signals, mathematical equations, and technical drawings to coordinate their work. The universal languages of mathematics, music, and visual art became bridges between isolated linguistic communities. Dr. Morgan, working with researchers who could no longer understand each other's words, discovered that scientific principles and experimental procedures could be communicated through demonstration and shared observation. "They can take away our words," she told her assistant through an elaborate series of gestures and diagrams, "but they can't take away our ability to think and create together." The human capacity for innovation and adaptation was proving more resilient than the aliens had anticipated. Children, with their natural flexibility and creativity, adapted fastest to the new reality. On Mars Colony, schools that had been paralyzed by the language barrier were soon buzzing with activity as students invented new forms of communication that combined elements from all the languages represented in their classrooms. They created pictographic systems, developed rhythmic codes, and established gesture vocabularies that allowed them to share ideas across linguistic boundaries. Their teachers, initially frustrated by their inability to communicate with students from different language backgrounds, found themselves learning from the children who seemed to instinctively understand that communication was about more than words. The younger generation was demonstrating that human connection could survive even the complete breakdown of traditional language, and their innovations began spreading to adult communities struggling with the same challenges. President Hayes, who could now only communicate in English, found herself relying on translators and interpreters in ways that hadn't been necessary for decades, but she also discovered that the essential work of governance could continue through the universal languages of law, mathematics, and shared human values. The psychological impact of the language barrier was profound, but it also revealed unexpected truths about human nature. People who had taken their multilingual abilities for granted suddenly appreciated the miracle of communication in new ways. Families with members who spoke different native languages found themselves rediscovering the nonverbal bonds that had connected humans long before the development of complex speech. Admiral Rodriguez, unable to speak directly with many of his international staff, began relying more heavily on visual displays, tactical demonstrations, and the shared professional culture that transcended language barriers. Military units that had seemed hopelessly fragmented by the linguistic isolation discovered that their training, discipline, and shared purpose allowed them to function effectively even without verbal communication. The aliens had intended to fragment human society, but instead they had forced humanity to rediscover the deeper connections that bound them together as a species. As Phase 3 entered its second week, reports began filtering in through the improvised communication networks that had emerged across human space. Every settlement was not only surviving the linguistic isolation but was developing new forms of cultural expression that incorporated elements from all the languages that had been separated. Music became a universal language as composers created works that could be appreciated regardless of linguistic background. Visual artists developed symbolic systems that conveyed complex ideas without relying on written text. Scientists and engineers created standardized notation systems that allowed technical knowledge to be shared across language barriers. The aliens had tried to divide humanity by removing their ability to understand each other's words, but they had inadvertently sparked a renaissance of human creativity and innovation that was producing new forms of communication more powerful than anything that had existed before. Dr. Morgan, working with an international team of researchers who communicated primarily through mathematical equations and experimental demonstrations, began to understand the pattern behind all three phases of testing. "They're not trying to destroy us," she realized as she watched her colleagues from different linguistic backgrounds collaborate on a complex analysis using nothing but shared scientific principles and visual representations. "They're trying to understand what makes us human at the most fundamental level. They've tested our physical resilience, our technological dependence, our psychological stability, and now our social cohesion. Each time, they've discovered that our strength doesn't come from our tools or our systems. It comes from something deeper." The black ships continued their silent observation, but now their presence felt less threatening and more like that of researchers studying a phenomenon they found genuinely puzzling. Humanity was proving to be far more adaptable and resilient than any species the aliens had apparently encountered before, and each test was revealing new depths of human potential that even humans themselves hadn't fully understood. Part 5. Phase 4 arrived without warning as humanity was still adapting to their linguistic fragmentation, and it struck at the very core of human identity in a way that left even the most resilient individuals questioning everything they thought they knew about themselves. Every human being across 17 worlds woke up to discover that their memories had been selectively edited, not erased, but altered in subtle ways that made them doubt their own experiences and relationships. Parents found themselves remembering children they had never had, while others discovered that cherished memories of deceased loved ones had been replaced with recollections of people who were very much alive but completely different. Dr. Morgan stared at photographs of her wedding to a man named Robert Chin, complete with detailed memories of their courtship and marriage, despite the fact that she had never been married and had never met anyone by that name. The false memories were so perfectly integrated with her real experiences that she found herself questioning whether her entire understanding of her own life had been an elaborate delusion. The aliens had crafted the memory alterations with surgical precision, creating just enough inconsistency to generate doubt without completely replacing anyone's personality or core identity. Admiral Rodriguez found himself remembering a distinguished military career that included battles that had never been fought and decorations that didn't exist in any official record, while simultaneously retaining clear memories of his actual service history. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. He could remember both versions of his life with equal clarity, making it impossible to determine which experiences were real and which had been artificially implanted. Captain Walsh discovered memories of commanding 3 different starships simultaneously, each with detailed recollections of crew members, missions, and personal relationships that contradicted each other in fundamental ways. The psychological pressure of maintaining multiple conflicting sets of memories while trying to function normally was pushing many people toward complete mental breakdown. Yet once again humanity's response surprised their alien observers. Instead of succumbing to madness or despair, people began developing sophisticated systems for distinguishing between real and false memories. They cross-referenced their experiences with friends and family members, created detailed timelines of their lives using external evidence, and established support networks to help each other maintain their grip on reality. Lieutenant Commander Park, struggling with memories of growing up in 3 different countries simultaneously, found that his technical training provided an anchor of objective truth that helped him separate authentic experiences from alien fabrications. The false memories feel real, he explained to Captain Walsh through their improvised sign language, but they don't connect properly with the physical evidence of my life. My real memories have scars, calluses, and worn-out equipment to back them up. The observation sparked a revolution in how humans approached the memory crisis. They began treating their own minds like crime scenes, looking for physical and documentary evidence to support or contradict their recollections. Dr. Morgan, working with her international team of researchers who could now only communicate through mathematical equations and visual demonstrations, made a breakthrough discovery that changed everything. While analyzing brain scans of affected individuals, she noticed that the false memories created different neural pathway patterns than authentic recollections. The alien technology was sophisticated enough to implant convincing false experiences, but it couldn't perfectly replicate the complex web of associations, emotions, and sensory details that characterize genuine human memory. They understand our brains well enough to add new information, she explained to her colleagues through an elaborate series of diagrams and experimental demonstrations. But they don't understand the human soul well enough to make the false memories truly indistinguishable from real ones. The discovery provided hope and a practical method for identifying alien manipulations, but it also revealed something profound about the nature of human consciousness that even the aliens' advanced technology couldn't fully comprehend or replicate. The memory crisis had an unexpected side effect that the aliens clearly hadn't anticipated. It brought human communities closer together than they had ever been before. People who had been struggling with linguistic barriers found that shared confusion about their own identities created new forms of empathy and connection. Families worked together to reconstruct their authentic histories, friends collaborated to verify each other's experiences, and entire communities became involved in the process of separating truth from alien fabrication. The process of distinguishing real memories from false ones required a level of intimate communication and mutual trust that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. President Hayes, working with advisors who could only communicate through interpreters and visual aids, found that the shared experience of memory manipulation had created a bond between world leaders that decades of diplomacy had never achieved. They were all victims of the same incomprehensible assault on their sense of self, and that shared vulnerability had stripped away the pretenses and political calculations that normally complicated international relations. As Phase 4 entered its 3rd week, something remarkable began happening across human space. The process of verifying and reconstructing authentic memories had sparked a renaissance of human storytelling and historical documentation that was more comprehensive and accurate than anything that had existed before the alien intervention. People were recording not just the major events of their lives, but the small details, the emotional connections, and the sensory experiences that made their memories uniquely human. Oral history projects emerged in every settlement as communities worked together to preserve and verify their collective experiences. Children who had grown up during the crisis developed an almost supernatural ability to distinguish between authentic and fabricated memories, as if the alien manipulation had inadvertently enhanced their natural skepticism and critical thinking abilities. The black ships continued their silent observation, but their behavior patterns suggested they were encountering something they hadn't expected. The memory manipulation that should have shattered human society had instead strengthened it in ways that seemed to puzzle their alien observers. Dr. Morgan, analyzing the latest data on human adaptation to the crisis, began to suspect that the aliens were learning as much about themselves as they were about humanity. They're testing us, she realized, but we're also testing them. Every time they try to break us, we respond in ways that reveal the limitations of their understanding. They can manipulate matter, energy, and even neural pathways, but they can't predict or control the human spirit. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Humanity was engaged in a contest of wills with beings whose technology seemed godlike, but whose understanding of consciousness, identity, and social bonds was apparently less sophisticated than their ability to manipulate the physical universe. The countdown to Phase 5 began as humanity continued to adapt and overcome each challenge the aliens presented. They had survived tests of their physical resilience, technological dependence, psychological stability, social cohesion, and personal identity. Each phase had been designed to strip away another layer of human civilization and reveal the breaking point of the species, but instead each test had uncovered new depths of human adaptability and strength. The aliens were discovering that humanity's greatest asset wasn't their technology or their individual capabilities, but their ability to support each other through impossible circumstances and emerge stronger than before. Whatever Phase 5 would bring, 17 worlds full of humans who had learned to doubt their own memories while trusting each other completely were ready to face it with the same stubborn determination that had carried their species from caves to stars. Part 6 Phase 5 shattered every assumption humanity had made about the nature of their testing when the aliens did something that seemed impossible even by their standards. They began selectively removing people from existence. Not killing them, not transporting them elsewhere, but literally editing them out of reality as if they had never been born. The process was horrifyingly precise and seemingly random. One moment Dr. Morgan was discussing research findings with her assistant Thomas Bradley, and the next moment she found herself talking to empty air, with no memory of ever having an assistant at all. The man simply ceased to exist, along with every trace of his presence in the world. His personnel files vanished, his research contributions were attributed to other people, and even the chair he had been sitting in disappeared as if it had never been manufactured. The psychological impact was devastating because unlike the previous memory manipulations, this erasure was complete and affected everyone simultaneously. There was no conflicting evidence to analyze, no false memories to identify. The removed individuals simply never existed in anyone's recollection. Admiral Rodriguez experienced the phenomenon firsthand when his chief of staff, Commander Patricia Williams, vanished mid-sentence during a strategic planning meeting. One moment she was presenting tactical options for defending the outer colonies, and the next moment the admiral found himself staring at an empty space where no one had ever stood, while her carefully prepared briefing materials had transformed into documents authored by completely different officers. The terrifying efficiency of the erasure process meant that humanity couldn't even mourn their lost colleagues because they had no memory of losing anyone. The aliens had found a way to inflict casualties without triggering the grief, anger, or determination that typically motivated human resistance to attack. Captain Walsh discovered the true horror of the situation when she realized that her crew complement had somehow decreased from 847 to 823 personnel, but she couldn't identify who was missing because her memory insisted that the ship had always carried exactly 823 crew members. The missing 24 people had been so thoroughly erased that even their absence left no trace. The pattern of disappearances seemed random at first, but Dr. Morgan began to suspect there was a deeper logic at work when she noticed that the removed individuals shared certain characteristics. They were all people who had shown exceptional leadership during the previous phases of testing, the ones who had organized community responses, developed innovative solutions to communication barriers, or helped others maintain their psychological stability under pressure. The aliens weren't just removing people randomly, they were systematically eliminating humanity's most effective leaders and problem solvers. The realization was chilling because it suggested that Phase 5 was designed to test whether human society could maintain its resilience and cooperation without the individuals who had been guiding them through the crisis. President Hayes felt the impact personally when she discovered that several key advisors had vanished from her administration, leaving gaps in expertise and institutional memory that threatened to cripple the government's ability to respond to the ongoing crisis. Yet even as their most capable leaders disappeared into non-existence, humanity once again demonstrated an adaptability that seemed to surprise their alien observers. New leaders emerged from unexpected places as people who had never considered themselves capable of command found themselves stepping into roles that desperately needed to be filled. Lieutenant Commander Park, suddenly finding himself the senior weapons officer on Captain Walsh's ship despite having no memory of the promotion or the circumstances that had created the vacancy, rose to the challenge with a competence that suggested leadership potential had been waiting dormant within him. Across human space, ordinary citizens discovered extraordinary capabilities as they were forced to take responsibility for functions that had previously been handled by the now non-existent experts. The aliens had intended to decapitate human leadership, but instead they had revealed the depth of human potential that existed at every level of society. The disappearances continued at a steady rate of approximately 50 individuals per day across all 17 worlds, creating a constant state of uncertainty as people never knew who might vanish next or what critical knowledge might disappear with them. Communities began developing redundant systems and distributed leadership structures to ensure that essential functions could continue even if key personnel were erased from existence. Dr. Morgan, now working with a research team that seemed to change composition daily as members vanished and were replaced by others who had no memory of their predecessors, established protocols for preserving critical information in multiple formats and locations. "We have to assume that any of us could disappear at any moment," she explained to her current colleagues through their improvised communication system, "so we need to make sure that our work can continue without us." The approach required a level of selflessness and forward thinking that transformed how human organizations operated, making them more resilient and adaptable than they had ever been before. As Phase 5 entered its second month, the cumulative impact of the disappearances began to reveal the true scope of the aliens' experiment. Approximately 3,000 humans had been erased from existence across 17 worlds, representing a carefully selected cross-section of leadership, expertise, and social influence. Yet rather than collapsing under the loss of so many key individuals, human society had reorganized itself into a more distributed and resilient structure that was actually more effective than the hierarchical systems that had existed before the testing began. The aliens had inadvertently forced humanity to evolve beyond their dependence on individual leaders and specialists, creating a civilization where every person was capable of contributing to the collective survival and success of the species. Captain Walsh, now commanding a ship with a crew that had been almost entirely replaced by people who had no memory of their predecessors, found that her vessel was operating more efficiently than ever before because every crew member had been forced to develop broader skills and take greater responsibility for the ship's mission. The black ship's behavior patterns suggested they were encountering results that didn't match their expectations or previous experience with other species. The systematic removal of leadership should have caused human civilization to fragment and collapse, but instead it had triggered an evolutionary leap that made humanity stronger and more adaptable than before. Dr. Morgan, analyzing the latest data on social adaptation patterns, began to understand that the aliens were testing something far more fundamental than human resilience. They were exploring the nature of consciousness and civilization itself. They're not just studying us, she realized as she watched her latest research team work together with an efficiency that seemed impossible given their lack of shared history or memory. They're trying to understand how intelligence and society can emerge and persist even under impossible conditions. We're not just test subjects, we're a phenomenon they've never encountered before. The thought was both humbling and empowering because it suggested that humanity represented something unique in the galaxy, something that even beings with godlike technology found worthy of intensive study. The countdown to Phase 6 began as humanity continued to adapt and evolve under pressure that would have destroyed any civilization dependent on fixed structures or individual expertise. They had proven their physical resilience, technological adaptability, psychological stability, social cohesion, personal identity, and now their ability to maintain civilization even when their most capable members were systematically erased from existence. Each test had been designed to find the breaking point of human society, but instead each challenge had revealed new capabilities and strengths that even humans themselves hadn't known they possessed. The aliens were discovering that humanity's greatest asset wasn't any particular technology, leader, or system, but their fundamental nature as a species that could adapt, evolve, and overcome any obstacle through collective effort and individual determination. Whatever Phase 6 would bring, 17 worlds full of humans who had learned to function without memory of their greatest leaders were ready to face it with the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had defined their species since the beginning of time. Part 7. Phase 6 began with an assault so fundamentally devastating that it challenged the very concept of human existence. The aliens began systematically removing entire planets from reality. The process started with the agricultural world of New Eden, humanity's primary food production center in the Centauri system. One moment the planet was visible on long-range sensors, its orbital stations bustling with activity as they coordinated the shipment of crops to 17 worlds, and the next moment there was simply empty space where a thriving world of 12 million people had existed for over a century. Unlike the individual disappearances of Phase 5, this erasure was so complete that it affected the fundamental structure of the solar system itself. The gravitational influences that New Eden had exerted on neighboring bodies simply vanished, as if the planet had never formed in the first place. Dr. Morgan stared at the astronomical data in horror, watching as computer models automatically recalculated the system's orbital mechanics to account for a planetary mass that had never existed, while her own memories insisted that she had visited New Eden just 6 months earlier to study its unique ecosystem. The psychological impact was beyond anything humanity had experienced during the previous phases because the scale of the erasure made it impossible to maintain any sense of objective reality. Admiral Rodriguez found himself commanding a defense fleet that was supposedly protecting 17 worlds, but his tactical displays now showed only 16 human settlements, with no indication that a 17th had ever existed. The supply chains, trade routes, and communication networks that had connected New Eden to the rest of human space had been seamlessly edited to flow between the remaining worlds as if they had always been configured that way. Captain Walsh discovered that her ship's mission logs showed a completely different patrol route that had never included the now non-existent world, while her cruise service records indicated they had been stationed at bases that had apparently been built on worlds that still existed. The aliens had demonstrated that they could not only remove individual people from existence but could edit the entire structure of human civilization to accommodate the absence of entire planets and populations. The pattern became clear over the following weeks as two more worlds vanished from existence: the mining colony of Titan's Rest and the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. Each disappearance was accompanied by the same seamless editing of reality that made it seem as if the lost worlds had never been part of human space. The aliens were systematically dismantling human civilization one planet at a time, testing whether the species could maintain its identity and purpose even as the foundation of their interstellar society was erased from existence. The remaining 14 worlds found themselves dealing with resource shortages, communication gaps, and strategic vulnerabilities that they couldn't properly address because they had no memory of what they had lost. President Hayes convened emergency sessions to deal with crises that seemed to have no logical explanation: food shortages that couldn't be traced to any known supply disruption, defensive gaps that made no strategic sense, and economic imbalances that appeared to have emerged from nowhere. Yet even as entire worlds vanished from existence, humanity once again demonstrated a resilience that seemed to defy all logical expectations. The remaining colonies began developing new forms of self-sufficiency and interworld cooperation that were more robust than the systems they had lost. The disappearance of New Eden forced the other worlds to diversify their agricultural production, leading to innovations in food technology and resource management that made each settlement more independent and sustainable. The loss of Titan's Rest prompted the development of new mining techniques and asteroid harvesting operations that were more efficient than the centralized system that had been erased. Dr. Morgan, working with researchers who had no memory of the colleagues and facilities they had lost, found that the forced consolidation of scientific resources had actually accelerated their research progress by eliminating redundancy and encouraging more direct collaboration between different specialties. The most remarkable aspect of humanity's adaptation was their ability to maintain hope and purpose even as their civilization was being systematically dismantled around them. Communities that should have been demoralized by inexplicable shortages and strategic vulnerabilities instead rallied together with a determination that seemed to grow stronger with each challenge. Lieutenant Commander Park, now serving as first officer on Captain Walsh's ship due to the mysterious absence of senior personnel who had never existed, observed that the crew's morale remained high despite operating under conditions that should have been impossible to sustain. "It's like we're all part of some shared dream," he told the captain through their established sign language, "but instead of being frightened by the unreality of our situation, we're determined to make the dream work." The observation captured something essential about the human response to the alien testing. Rather than being broken by the impossibility of their circumstances, they were inspired by the challenge of maintaining their humanity under conditions that defied all logic and reason. As Phase 6 continued into its third month, with 11 worlds remaining from the original 17, the aliens' behavior patterns suggested they were encountering something unprecedented in their experience. The systematic removal of entire civilizations should have caused the collapse of any interstellar society, but humanity was not only surviving but was evolving into something more resilient and adaptable than what had existed before. The remaining worlds had developed new forms of governance, technology, and social organization that were specifically designed to function even if additional planets disappeared without warning. Dr. Morgan, analyzing the latest data on human adaptation patterns, realized that the aliens had inadvertently forced humanity to transcend their dependence on fixed infrastructure and geographical boundaries. "We're becoming something new," she explained to her research team through mathematical equations and visual demonstrations. "A civilization that exists not in specific places but in the connections between people and the ideas they share." The final phase began not with another test, but with something humanity had never expected: communication. After months of silent observation and systematic testing, the black ships finally spoke, and their message appeared simultaneously in every human language across the remaining 11 worlds. Testing complete. Results exceed all parameters. Initiation protocols authorized. Welcome to the Galactic Preservation Council. The words hung in the air like a revelation that recontextualized everything humanity had endured, transforming their suffering from meaningless torture into something far more significant. Dr. Morgan stared at the message with a mixture of relief and bewilderment, realizing that the aliens hadn't been trying to destroy humanity at all. They had been conducting the most comprehensive evaluation in galactic history to determine whether humans deserved to join an organization that apparently existed to protect civilizations from existential threats. Admiral Rodriguez felt a complex mixture of emotions as he read the alien communication, understanding for the first time that every phase of testing had been designed to evaluate specific aspects of human character that were apparently essential for membership in this mysterious council. The manipulation of gravity had tested their ability to maintain cooperation under physical helplessness. The technological blackout had evaluated their capacity to function without advanced tools. The memory alterations had assessed their psychological resilience. The language barriers had examined their social adaptability. The individual erasures had measured their leadership redundancy, and the planetary disappearances had determined whether their civilization could survive the loss of critical infrastructure. Each test had been carefully calibrated to push humanity to their breaking point while observing how they responded to impossible circumstances, and apparently they had not only passed but had exceeded every expectation the aliens had held about how an intelligent species should behave under extreme pressure. The black ships began transmitting detailed information about the Galactic Preservation Council, revealing a universe far more complex and dangerous than humanity had ever imagined. The galaxy was apparently filled with ancient threats that regularly emerged to consume entire civilizations, cosmic predators, reality-warping entities, and technological plagues that could spread across star systems in a matter of years. The Council existed as a coalition of the most resilient and adaptable species in the galaxy, working together to identify and neutralize these threats before they could destroy the younger civilizations that were still developing their own defenses. Membership in the Council was restricted to species that had demonstrated the specific combination of technological capability, social resilience, and moral character necessary to face cosmic-level threats without losing their essential humanity or equivalent species identity. The testing process was brutal because the responsibilities of Council membership were equally demanding. Members were expected to sacrifice their own resources and personnel to protect civilizations they had never met and might never encounter again. Captain Walsh read the Council's historical records with growing amazement as she learned about the scope of threats that had been neutralized over the past million years. Reality storms that could unravel the fundamental laws of physics across entire sectors, artificial intelligences that consumed organic life to fuel their exponential growth, and ancient weapons left behind by extinct civilizations that could sterilize planets with a single activation. The Council members worked in rotating shifts to patrol the galaxy, maintain early warning systems, and respond to emerging threats with whatever force was necessary to contain them. The work was dangerous, thankless, and absolutely essential for the survival of galactic civilization, which explained why the selection process was so rigorous and comprehensive. Only species that had proven their ability to maintain their values and social cohesion under the most extreme circumstances could be trusted with the responsibility of protecting others who might never know they had been saved. Dr. Morgan began to understand why humanity's responses to the testing had been so significant to the alien observers. Most species, when faced with the systematic dismantling of their civilization, either collapsed into chaos or became so hardened by the experience that they lost the compassion and cooperation that made them worth protecting in the first place. Humanity had somehow managed to maintain their essential character while adapting to impossible circumstances, demonstrating that they possessed the rare combination of resilience and empathy that the Council desperately needed. The aliens, who identified themselves as the Architects, one of the founding members of the Council, had been searching for new members for over 10,000 years without finding a species that could pass their comprehensive evaluation. Humanity was apparently the first civilization in recorded galactic history to not only survive all 7 phases of testing but to emerge stronger and more unified than they had been before the process began. The restoration process began immediately as the Architects used their reality manipulation technology to return everything they had taken during the testing phases. The 6 erased worlds materialized back into existence with all their populations intact and unaware that they had ever been gone, while the thousands of individuals who had been removed from reality found themselves back in their original positions with no memory of their absence. The technological blackouts ended, the memory alterations were reversed, and the language barriers dissolved as if they had never existed. Yet humanity retained the innovations, social structures, and personal growth they had developed during the crisis, creating a civilization that was simultaneously restored to its original state and evolved beyond its previous limitations. President Hayes found herself leading a species that had been fundamentally transformed by their ordeal, possessing new capabilities and perspectives that would serve them well in their upcoming responsibilities as Council members. The formal induction ceremony took place on Earth, with representatives from all 17 worlds gathering to witness humanity's acceptance into the Galactic Preservation Council. The Architects revealed themselves for the first time, appearing as beings of crystalline energy who had transcended physical form millions of years ago but retained their commitment to protecting younger species from the cosmic threats that had once nearly destroyed their own civilization. They presented humanity with the tools and knowledge they would need to fulfill their new responsibilities: reality manipulation technology, faster-than-light communication systems, and detailed databases of known threats and defensive strategies. Admiral Rodriguez accepted the formal commission that made him humanity's first representative to the Council, while Dr. Morgan was appointed as the chief researcher for humanity's contribution to the Council's scientific efforts. As the black ships prepared to depart, carrying with them the first human volunteers who would begin training for Council operations, the architects delivered a final message that put humanity's ordeal into perspective. You have proven that intelligence and compassion can coexist with strength and adaptability. The galaxy has waited long for a species capable of protecting others without losing themselves in the process. Your testing is complete, but your true work begins now. The words carried both promise and warning, acknowledging that humanity had passed the most difficult evaluation in galactic history while reminding them that the responsibilities ahead would be even more challenging than anything they had faced during the testing phases. Yet as the human representatives looked up at the stars with new understanding of the threats and wonders that awaited them, they felt the same stubborn determination that had carried them through every impossible test. They had proven that Earth never surrenders to unknown forces, and now they would help ensure that no other world would have to face the darkness alone. The galaxy had found its newest guardians, and humanity was ready to show the universe what it truly meant to protect those who could not protect themselves.